We heard this, and it was just a, like I had been shot. Like, you shooting me now. Just no respect, no sympathy, nothing. And so my emotions were raging, and I had to go up there just to let them know, you just really don't care, do you?
Desmond Cole is a journalist with a publication called Torontoist in Toronto. He happens to be in Ferguson, Missouri today, and we're following up on what he's learning there. Now, Desmond, you're talking about the police officer, and that being the most interesting part of the story at this juncture as far as you're concerned. I have seen a couple of clips of the police officer's conversation with George Stephanopoulos, and the officer talked about how the now victim in this case, Michael Brown, was a big guy. He reached inside, he tried to get the gun, he tried to get his finger inside the trigger guard in order to shoot the police officer. Do you disbelieve that testimony from the officer?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think that most of what he says defies reality. But rather than just simply to state my opinion, I think that that's what most people here in the street feel, Jerry, and that's the reason why they're so angry. But let me ask your viewers this in terms of what Officer Wilson said. Even if Mike Brown reached into the car, even if Mike Brown punched the officer in the face, even if Mike Brown reached for the officer's gun, Darren Wilson shot at Mr. Brown twice and wounded him, at which point Brown allegedly ran away from the vehicle. Why would you shoot someone who was running away from you? Do you know that after that happened, the officer claimed that Brown turned around, and remember, he's been shot already, and then began charging at the officer, one hand in a fist, the other inside of his waistband. The assumption in his waistband being that, there was a gun in there. I love these stories about black people. We always are right in front of the officer and we have a gun. We want to punch them and scuffle with them. Then we always run away and, hey, I remember I have a gun now. Maybe I'll turn around and shoot him. Do any of your viewers actually believe the officer when he says that that's what went down? Because I think it's an incredible story that I cannot believe.
Well, see, unlike you, I'm not making a judgment, and I never have on this story, as to who was right or wrong in that circumstance, because I don't have enough information. I thought the district attorney made a good point when he said only 12 people, these people on this grand jury are the only people who have all the evidence, and they didn't come back with an indictment.
Jerry, you said a 12-year-old was shot in Cleveland on Sunday and was killed by a police officer. He had a BB gun. He was black, too. There are millions of kids in America who have a BB gun, but it's a black kid that gets shot. There is a 46-year-old man in a parking lot who had mental illness and was shot and killed by the police. There were about 15 of them surrounding him. We have Trayvon Martin, who was stalked and killed by not even a police officer, by a civilian. He got off too, Jerry.
Okay,
I don't need evidence from these cases when I see this pattern happening over and over again.
Well, that's a shocking thing to hear a journalist say. A journalist says, I don't need evidence. Desmond,
you cut me off. I said I don't need evidence to be highly suspicious, and I am highly suspicious of Darren Brown's story. I do not believe it. I don't take it as one way or the other, but I'll add to the fact that as a black person myself down here covering this story, I'm likely to be the next victim of something like this, just like every other black person who's in this country. So I have to be a little more careful about reading these stories and interpreting them, because it could be my life on the line next, Jerry.
Okay, I could also deflect and talk about white people who've been attacked by blacks simply because they're white, as stated by the attacker, or I could stick with the topic. I asked you whether there was any credibility to the district attorney saying only the grand jury has all the evidence. Is that not worth anything?
No, it's not worth a lot to me, and I'll explain to you why. They have published all of the evidence that the grand jury had so that you and I and everyone else can look at it. But there are also huge holes in the evidence that was presented to the grand jury. In the story that the prosecutor read the night of the decision, he went from the part of the story where Mike Brown was apparently right up close to Darren Wilson and punching him, to the part where Mike Brown is getting shot 3 times. By the way, Jerry, did you know that all the 3 shots that entered Mike Brown's body after he was near the car, in his head, in his torso, he was in a bent-over position. So if you want to talk about evidence, that's what the autopsy concluded. So I guess Mike Brown had his head down when he was charging this officer and making him fear for his life, too. This is the evidence, and I'm sorry that you take it so easily. I don't.
Well, no, I just told you I don't know, but it's clearly, what I'm trying to tell you, Desmond, is it's clear to me that actually I don't think you care. I think you've made your mind up already.
Here's what I've decided. I've decided that if a police officer can get exonerated for this kind of a story over and over and over and over again, that black people are justified in being outraged and in taking to the streets because their lives are actually not safe. And rather than listening to other people lecture black people about how not to get shot next time, I think that they are right for taking matters into their own hands. And so as far as my opinion, that's really what you're getting from me, and I will not apologize for that because there's already too much focus on what you talked about earlier, vandalism, rage, just this idea that black people are always angry and outraged and unreasonable, actually.
1,000 people marched in Toronto last night while you were in Ferguson. Two things I want to ask you about. One is, white people were told if they wanted to march, they had to go to the back of the march. Should that have happened?
That's not up to me. That's up to the organizers, and I'm sure they had a reason.
Okay, well, I would expect a better answer from you than that.
Jerry, what do you want me to say? That the white people should have been at the front and that we should have let them all speak first? This is a situation that affects black people. So if black people want to be the focus of the attention, I don't mind that. Is that
all right, then my next question is, 1,000 people marched yesterday, white people not really welcome, because of something that happened in Ferguson, Missouri, another country. Black people are killing black people in Toronto, as you know, all the time. Nobody marching about that.
Oh, I see. So we're not going to hold the police who have guns and the authority of the state to a higher standard than somebody who's committing a crime in the community. We're going to say that that's the same thing. I mean,
no, but it's not happening in the community.
You also changed what you just said. First, you said that they were asked to march at the back. Then you said that they weren't welcome. If white people weren't welcome and didn't want to be put at the back of the march, maybe they wouldn't have been there.
And so it's perfectly legitimate to put together a march to express concern about something that happened in another nation while not really seeming to address the issues of the community in which these people live, right here in Toronto.
Jerry, people like you do an excellent job, no matter what the issue is, of talking about black people killing each other. So there's no lack of airtime on that fact. However, the protests that we were seeing across America, 170 countries in the United States having protests yesterday, that is unprecedented, and that's why the focus is on that. And we'll have to wait for another day to talk about black people killing each other, but that's really, really not the issue at this time.
I think the issue, Desmond, and you and I have been able to demonstrate it, is we don't have conversations about this. We have parallel talk.
Well, I mean, I want to talk about the way that power works, right? Darren Wilson has access to a lot of power as a police officer, just as the officer who killed Sami Yatim does. That's why these stories get the attention that they do. And people are very worried when an officer abuses his power. You know, you and I have talked on your programs before about different ways in which officers abuse their power. And we never seem to stray when we're talking about that. I find it's only when we're talking about how it happens to black people that some people get very uncomfortable at that statement and want to say, well, wait a minute, we should be talking about everybody. We shouldn't be talking about everybody when it's happening to one group of people over and over and over again. But I would say that if it bothers people that we're talking so much about black people, then they ought to stay out of the discussion because it's not for them. This is a discussion about black people and the way that they're being treated in this part of the world.
If you're watching and you're not familiar with the Sami Yatim case that Desmond just mentioned, he was a guy on a streetcar who had apparently been threatening people by the time the police arrived. There was no one else on the streetcar, and suddenly one of the officers shot Sami Yatim while he was still on the streetcar alone. He was obviously in no position to hurt anyone. That officer faces the most serious charges you could face, Desmond, and you don't hear me arguing against that.
No, that's the difference between Canada and the United States is that rather than having a big process to decide whether to even press charges, we did press charges against that officer, and he's going to face those charges. And again, Jerry, that is the context in which we should look at Ferguson. That didn't happen here. The officer's not even going to face any charges. And to ask people in this city and across the country to kind of just go back to their lives, that's outrageous. They can't do that.
Well, it's not. The difference is not Canada and the U.S. The difference is one incident captured on several video cameras, as in the case here in Toronto, and one not. And so then you've got a he said situation, and people line up on the side they want to hear.
And that's my point about the fact that Officer Darren Wilson has so much power, is that his word as an officer is going to carry more weight in society than that of a young black man who's dead and can't speak for himself. And so I am not swayed by a grand jury siding with the person who they're told every day in their lives to have respect and authority for. That actually really doesn't surprise me. I wish we took a little bit more of a skeptical look at that.
Well, I can understand that, but also the video we do have is of the victim in this case robbing a store just before he encountered the cop. So you're right. I mean, automatically, a lot of people are going to defer toward the cop in that kind of a situation.
I got to tell you, too, Jerry, I'm really glad you brought that up. You know why? Because the police originally told everyone that Officer Wilson didn't have access to that information when he confronted Mike Brown. And you noticed when the decision was released that the idea that Mike Brown had allegedly robbed a store moments earlier was central to the reason why he was confronted and eventually shot. But again, the police told us at the beginning that the officer didn't have that information. So why are we believing this so easily? Why are we being asked to consider both sides and to, come to some kind of bland non-conclusion when there's seemingly so many inconsistencies in the police's story? Now, I'm a journalist. It's my job to find these things out and to read them carefully. Maybe the average person isn't reading all of this stuff as much as I am. But believe me, the people who are out in the street in this city, they know, because they've been out there listening to what the police had to say. And if they hadn't come out there, the police may not have said anything at all. It took a very long time after Mike Brown was killed for there to even be any word on what had happened.
Desmond is in Ferguson. Talk to you when you come back to Toronto.
Take care, Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you.